It's believed the soul is the source of life. Johnny's blessing refers to the soul as vital fluids, and the Soul Master tells us that the answer was in the soul that animates our bodies. But Johnny's blessing also transfigures vital fluids into blue lifeblood, where replacing our soul-based health with lifeblood functions as a clear indication that life exists with or without the soul. And there are other such vital forces in this world, most notably the radiant infection in the void, alongside the flora-like life force of the Green King and the spore-producing fungi, and possibly the hive as well. In-game, there are many instances that denote stages of intersection between these life forces. Between Void and Soul, we have the King Soul's transformation into the Void Heart, the vessels in general, the Void counterparts to Soul spells, and the Snail Shamans, who are apparently Void-based but manipulate Soul at will. Between Soul and Green King, we have the White Lady, who is Soul-based while being a tree rather than a bug. Between Radiance, or Dream, and Green King, there are the Whispering Roots. Between Lifeblood and Radiance, we find great similarity between the Lifeblood vines and the Infection veins, and also between the Life Seeds and Light Seeds. The Lifeblood cave is filled with blue Dream Essence particles, and there's a blue Dream Catcher in Godhome. Along with Lifeblood itself, alluding to a direct connection between Lifeblood and the Dream Realm, even though the Dream Realm is heavily associated with Radiance. But without the Radiance's influence, the Dream Realm itself appears to have mostly a blue hue in its natural state, as can be seen in its skyboxes and the Shrine of Believers. Godhome has a predominantly golden hue instead, which is more akin to the Radiance, but they are specifically trying to attune themselves to the Radiance, explaining why the other Dream Arenas would lack that golden color. Between Lifeblood and Green King, the Lifeblood vines grow Lifeblood butterflies, showcasing a mixture of plant life and lifeblood. Between Fungi and Soul, the fungi are able to infect the bugs of Hallownest, who are associated with Soul, and they overtake a Soul-based tablet in the Kingdom's Edge, the tablet that gives hints about the whereabouts of Mr. Mushroom, which seems originally Soul-based because of its model and overlay effect. Between Radiance and Soul, there's all the infected bugs of Hallownest, the Dream Nail's ability to get their soul, and there are also soul-like white Dream Essence particles in the White Palace, but, as I have mentioned, despite being heavily associated with the Radiance, the Dream Realm itself isn't exclusively associated with that entity. And finally, between Lifeblood and Void, there's a shared location, the Abyss. Most notably, though, there is a system in place where different life forces supplant each other. As previously mentioned, Lifeblood replaces Soul. The glowing bloom charm shows that the radiant infection drains the soul of its host. The fungi assimilate other life forms and replaces their minds. And in the Embrace the Void ending, Void shows it can completely overtake physical bodies, as exemplified by the God-Seeker. This is observable in the game world, with different areas being controlled by different life forces. It's a zero-sum game. Wherever one life force takes hold, the others must subside. And while this could be seen as a reflection of, or parallel to, the conflict between the Pale King, the Radiance, and the Lord of Shades, I think that's a somewhat limited perspective. I don't think this conflict is between individual entities characterized by different life forces, I think the life forces themselves are sentient and actively fighting each other for dominion. The Void entity demonstrates this concept perfectly. The Shades, who are all made of pure void, manifest themselves as individuals, but they are eventually assimilated by the Void entity, which exists not only as an amalgamation of those shades, but also of all other creatures it would come to absorb, as illustrated by the overtaking of the Godseeker's body and the lighthouse attendant's dream-nailed dialogue. This entity is literally the conscious manifestation of Void itself, and all other instances of Void are one with it. Remember that, even prior to being absorbed, the Shades already acted as one, as in with a singular purpose, driven by a single goal. And we can use the Void entity as a primer for the other life forces as well, since they may look different on the surface, but besides a few quirks, they all function basically the same way. For instance, the infection disappears when the Radiance is defeated because that being is the Radiant infection itself, even though it appears as distinct individuals if you just look at the infected bugs. Just like the Void entity, the Radiance is the conscious manifestation of this particular life force. The same goes for Mr. Mushroom, the fungi, and their one mind. And even so operates the same way. It infects bugs with its higher intelligence, a single mind-altering effect spread across multiple individuals that pulls the infected into the worm's thrall. One kingdom, one king, the soul is one. Before moving on, it's also worth noting that this ageless war is cyclical in nature. This is implied by the civilizations falling and rising on top of each other, the worm's life cycles, and even Mr. Mushroom's passing of the age. This is also hinted at by the Seer's dialogue. As history goes on, I grow numb to its repetitions. Now that we have identified the general rules of engagement, we can start going into a more detailed analysis of this war's timeline. But we should preface this section by setting a couple of guidelines. First, let's get nitty-gritty on semantics and establish that the dream realm isn't an actual dream. I think psychic plane would be a more fitting description, especially considering the Dreamnail's ability to read thoughts. That may seem inconsequential, but it serves to shift our perspective in regards to the nature of the Radiance. A creature born of dreams sounds a lot more mystical than a consciousness after all, which falls more in line with my belief that the Radiance is the sentience of the infection given form. Its presence on the physical world seems very limited though, as the infected seem to devolve into baser instincts, instead of becoming fully functional extensions of the Radiance's mind. This, in turn, leads me to believe that the Radiance is motivated to infect as many bugs as possible in order to increase its power in the Dream Realm. In the physical plane, the infection is nothing but a plague, but in the Dream Realm, the Radiance could rule over an entire world. Something else I'd like to point out is, even though both the Radiance and the Pale King were ascribed the role of creators, as seen in the Seer's dialogue and the Hunter's Journal entry for the Wing Mode, the Radiance didn't create the moths any more than the worm created the bugs of Hallownest. This is more evident in relation to the King, since the Godseeker predates Hallownest and Mr. Mushroom says the worms enthralls the bugs rather than create them. we can still apply the same logic to the Radiants, and, honestly, creation myths just seem like a natural next step when dealing with godlike creatures. After each cycle of the war ends, after the bugs break free from the influence of any given life force, their previous life is less than a distant memory, more akin to a fading dream instead. From their perspective, it's as if the world had just come into existence at that very same moment. With that out of the way, we can get started with the timeline itself by talking about Lifeblood and Void. They are scarcely found throughout the game, with the exception being the Abyss, which hosts both a Sea of Void and the Lifeblood Cave, where we find the Lifeblood core and the Abyss creature. Lifeblood seems to be growing upward from this location, the remnants of an ancient forgotten civilization, so it's safe to assume that this cave is the oldest instance of this life force that can be found in-game. Here, two details stand out: the entrance to the cave and the room where we acquire Abyss Shriek. The pedestal that gives the spell has a Dreamnail dialogue that says, "Our voices will cry out again," which could be interpreted as a reference to the siblings, but this room doesn't have any eggs, discarded shells, or siblings for that matter. What it does have are engraved boulders that might be mistaken for statues, but that I believe to be the original inhabitants of this place, the ones whose voices will cry out again. Now, while the Void Idols and Arcane Eggs show this ancient civilization was attuned to the Void at some point, I believe this room indicates that, prior to that point, Lifeblood was the dominant life force. This can be initially surmised by the likeness between these ancient corpses and the Abyss creature, and this idea is further illustrated by the entrance to the Lifeblood Cave, which is locked and only allows passage to those who bear a high amount of lifeblood themselves. After the downfall of its king, the creature shut itself away inside this vault. Here, its precious lifeblood could be preserved until such a time when it could re-emerge and reclaim its position in the endless war. In this scenario, Lifeblood predates the Void, but we'd still need to factor Soul into the equation, since they have also shown the ability to manipulate that life force through the Soul Totems. A Soul Cycle coming after the Void seems very intuitive, considering Soul is the current life force cycle and the Pale King's apparent dominion over the Void as well. The Snail Shamans can also be used as evidence for this argument. There aren't many of them on the surface, but they seem to have been the most predominant bug species of the Abyss. Their shells can be found buried on rock closer to the surface, but there they're both sparse and mixed with other kinds of shells. Once you approach the Abyss, however, they're everywhere, and theirs is the only kind to be found. This transition is clearly visible in certain areas, such as the descent that leads you to the Mr. Mushroom tablet and the black egg encrusted with gel in Kingdom's Edge. These void-based, soul-manipulating snails serve as a link in the timeline between the Ancients and Hallownest, between Void and Soul, even if their own knowledge of that civilization has also been lost to time. That ancient Soul era must have been short-lived, though, given the scarcity of historical evidence of its existence. At that point, their civilization seems to have just vanished. This can be explained by the arrival of the Radiant infection, which would have devolved bug kind making it impossible for an advanced bug society to be created during its reign. This radiant interlude is also hinted at by the seer's words. The folk of my tribe were born from a light, similar to essence, but another light appeared in our world, a worm that took the form of a king. A line of dialogue that clearly establishes a direct transition from Radiance to the current Soul Cycle. But even though a bug society could not be formed during the time of the Radiant Light, perhaps a different kind of society could have, a kind that was not quite bug-like. The lore tablets stating, though once our lands, a pale being lays claim to the caverns ahead, and those who stray from the White King's roads shall face the law of confirm and the Green King, also known as Green Children, coexisted with Hallownest for some time. And if the snails are a link between Void and Soul, then the White Lady is a link too, albeit one between Flora and Soul instead. But I believe the Green Children coexisted with the Radiant Infection as well. On this subject, let's start by making a distinction between the Moss King and the Green King. The first mention of the Green King comes from Elderbug, when he says the Green Path was once inhabited by strange creatures not quite plant and not quite bug. They are later referenced by Greenpath's lore tablets, stating they came from the Dream, a place they hoped they would return to, and also by a Whispering Root. Now, Moss King is the name given by the Hunter's Journal to the enemies we fight in-game, but they're not half bug and half plant. They're just bugs in disguise, a fact that is clearly visible in the corpses they leave behind. So, the initial picture being presented is that the Green King lost their plant-like features and became regular bugs. The clues for this conclusion come, again, from the tablets in the root. Hirinun, we need you now. We grow tired away from you. Our leaves are falling. And Green King lost, paths overgrown, dream forgotten. But there's a problem with this conclusion, a problem called Yzma. Given her distinct plant-like corpse, I believe her to be an actual Green King, the last of her kind. Both her overgrowth and location can also be traced back to the Green Path as well. And since she clearly didn't turn into a regular bug, then, presumably, neither did the rest of the Green King. I think what the Whispering Root is alluding to is that the Green Children return to the Dream from whence they came. The Moss King are merely mimicking them. This second conclusion not only accounts for Yzma, but for the Radiance as well. If the Green King wanted to return to the Dream, that means they never wished to leave that place to begin with. The power of the Radiance in the Dream Realm would have grown alongside the spread of the infection in the ancient civilization, which would have threatened the Green King inhabiting that plane. They only left because they had to. But when the Pale King contained the infection and founded Hallownest, the Radiance's power subsided and the Green Children eventually found their way back home. And how did the Pale King contain the infection that time around, you might ask? Well, the Pale King did what the Pale King does. He built a prison for it. The Crystal Peak is where the Worm-turned-King struck its first blow against the Radiant Light. The crystal lore is said to contain a sort of energy, although one not as powerful as the soul the city dwellers harnessed. With light refracted, this energy was contained. Now they gleam and glow in the darkness. They sing too, if you listen, very softly. These crystals are used to contain light, which is associated with the radiance. And the singing, which can also be heard by Mila, indicates this isn't just a regular kind of light, but the more exotic, sentient kind. And finally, the enraged Crystal Guardian shoots orange beams of light from its crystallized limbs, a clear indication that the light inside said crystals is, in fact, radiant. The deep focus charm even hints at how the effects of this process would have presented themselves, since it focuses soul in order to heal the body. This theory also explains the location of Hallownest's crown, since the place where the worm defeated the Radiance is the place where it became the de facto king of this land. But, as we all know, this prison wouldn't last forever, and the infection would spread again. Poor, infected Mila provides the last piece of evidence when she says, "What meaning in darkness, yet here I remain. I'll wait here forever till light blooms again." Now, we can dissect the Pale King's gameplay and the steps that lead to the final reckoning against the Radiance. The first thing one needs to realize is that this war isn't about Hallownest. This conflict spans through many ages, and the worm knew the Radiance would return someday. But he thought he had harnessed the void, and he would contain the Radiance as well. This was his last stand. Here, in Hallownest, the worm would end this war once and for all. Stone walls can restrain a bug, crystals may hold the light, but how do you imprison an enemy unbound by physical constraints? The life forces may appear ethereal to us, but they are like tangible matter to each other. Thus, one can be used to restrain another, such as the soul-filled lighthouse containing the void tendrils. A cage built of life force was necessary. Dreamers contained in Dream to create a seal of soul, to secure an egg of void, to contain the Hollow Knight, to imprison the Radiance. Soul of worm, soul of root, heart of void. The worm and the White Lady combined their mastery over soul to conceive the vessels, literal vessels of soul meant to contain the void within them, which would, in turn, hopefully help restrain the radiant light. What meaning in darkness, yet here I remain. The plane up to this point, the portion of the plane that the dreamers would have known about, consisted of a prison that would last eternal. But the king knew the radiance would not be so easily contained. He'd feared the Hollow Knight may not endure the test of time, and so a backup plan was conceived as well. And we, the little ghost, the pale thing, are the backup plan, or one like us to be more accurate. Another vessel that be strong enough to break the seals, defeat the Hollow Knight, and take his place. And maybe even something more. The first clue showing the king predicted our quest is the fact that the White Lady had been waiting for a vessel. More specifically, she had been waiting to help it in replacing the Hollow Knight by granting the boon of half the King's Soul Charm. Now, in order to make use of this boon, one would need to retrieve its counterpart from inside the White Palace, which is currently inside a dream. And in order to access that dream, one would need the dream nail, but the nail isn't something we can acquire on our own. It had to be granted to us by the seer. yet another boon to help us in our task. So, she's giving you this charm, but in order to use it, you'd need another item that can only be given by the seer, which indicates both to be working in tandem. There'd be no point in her giving you her item if she didn't already know. The seer would be giving you the dream nail, right? And Hornet is the last piece of this puzzle. The White Lady clearly knows about Hornet, and Hornet clearly knows about the vessels, their origin, and the whole plan to contain the Radiance. But here's where her participation gets interesting. She's the one that points you towards the King's Brand. Later, the White Lady points you towards the Abyss and the Birthplace, a location that can only be accessed with said King's Brand. So, this would indicate that they are both working together as well. Why else would the White Lady point you towards a location that can only be accessed with the King's Brand, unless she knew Hornet would help you get it? And after you have acquired the Void Heart, after you ascend back from the birthplace, Hornet is waiting for you. Hornet knows about the Void Heart and what it allows you to do, just as the White Lady seems to know about it as well. In our first encounter with Hornet, she says she can't allow us to attempt our task, and her Dream Nail dialogue reveals that she thinks we're weak. In our second encounter, she confesses she had underestimated us, and now that she thinks we might be strong enough, she decides to help. Then, in our third encounter, her Dream Nail dialogue says, "Could this one succeed?" implying we're one among many she would have tested before. The three of them had been waiting for you, for a vessel like you. The White Lady says it so. The seer was keeping watch, waiting to gift you with the Dream Nail and to guide you into awakening it. And Hornet had been testing the vessels that showed up in Hallownest, waiting to find one who'd be strong enough to undertake this task. These three characters function as separate moving parts of the same intricate plan, with the same ultimate goal. Each one gives a quest and/or assistance, but on their own, neither of them can get you where you need to be. They all need each other to fulfill their task. They all need a common thread to bring them together in this endeavor. They all need the Pale King, the White Lady's husband, the gendered child's father, and the Mothling Seer's liege. Regarding the King's involvement in all this, first, there are the soul tablets welcoming higher beings all the way out in the King's Path, demonstrating that they had expected bugs capable of manipulating soul to leave Hallownest and then to return to it. And we may not be the only soul manipulating denizens of this kingdom, but Hornet's dialogue in Greenpath is very telling. She says, "I know what you are, I know what you try to do," which translates into, "You are a vessel, therefore you will try to break the seals." So, those tablets may not have been left only for the returning vessels, but the king certainly knew vessels would possibly be coming back from beyond the kingdom's border, and that they could make use of the guidance given by those tablets as well. Hornet even alludes to the possibility that leaving the kingdom was essential for us to have grown strong enough by saying, "I've since guessed the truth. You've seen beyond this kingdom's bounds. Yours is resilience born of two voids." I believe it was necessary for us to leave the kingdom in order to relinquish our higher minds, which is granted to all Hallownest inhabitants by the influence of King and Soul. No mind to think, no will to break. And then, finally, beyond replacing the Hollow Knight in order to contain the Radiance, I think the king had hoped we'd be able to use the void in order to defeat the Radiance, rather than confine it. The king's message reads, Soul of worm, soul of root, heart of void. It's not just a body of void, or filled with void. It's a heart of void. It's the void heart. The king not only knew about the void heart, he also laid the path for you to acquire it. You may think yourself in control, little bug, but your path had already been chosen for you, long before your journey had ever begun. And what of the Pale King? Where is the Lord and Father of Hallownest? Since we can find his corpse in the White Palace, it seems universally accepted the Pale King is dead, which falls in line with the mushrooms ruminating over his foretold demise, and the rumors stating he abandoned his subjects and went into hiding. The question, then, becomes about how and why did he die. But there are two problems here. First, those rumors are found in the game's manual, under the rumors section. The same section that talks about the distant village granting rest to weary travelers, and also about how the 5 great knights of Hallownest all surely must have died, both of which are obviously not true. So, likewise, the rumor about the king really is presented as just that, nothing but a rumor, which makes it a very unreliable source of information at best. Admittedly, this argument would be too circumstantial by itself, but, luckily, there's a second piece of evidence that should be quite incontrovertible. We may find the king's dead body in White Palace, sure, but that's not the only corpse we've found left by that very same creature. The worm's cast-off shell establishes a crucial precedent regarding this being's relationship to death, as Bardun would posit. But what is death for that ancient being? More transformation, methinks. The worm's death triggered its transformation into the Pale King, and thus it's only reasonable that the same thing happened in the palace, that he transformed again and left his dead husk behind. Considering otherwise without further evidence is to make unnecessary assumptions. Even thematically, the Pale King looks like he's in a cocoon, from which he will emerge in his final form. So, we need not find out how the Pale King died. We need only to deduce what he transformed into, and what happened to him afterward. To unravel this mystery, what we need is a differential representation of the Pale King, something that doesn't look like the image usually associated with him, but that can be confirmed to be the king nonetheless. And we can find that in the memory of the White Defender. Here, sitting upon his throne, the king is shown to have wings. This depiction is consistent with both the Hallownest seal and the architecture of the White Palace. The seal has the shape of a winged bug, and unless the Pale King enjoyed going through the path of pain every time he wanted to visit his own quarters, then the palace seems to have been built with a flying resident in mind. So, with this new image of a flying bug in mind, another detail suddenly becomes more relevant. It had originally come to me in the form of a question, one I couldn't properly answer at the time. And I'll ask you now what I asked myself back then. Why is there a statue of the Radiance in Hallownest's crown? I had brushed this question aside after realizing the Radiance had been imprisoned in Crystal Peak, but that answer never truly satisfied me. It still seemed unreasonable to me that they'd erect a statue of their enemy instead of their king in a place called Hallownest's crown. Well, do you want to know where the king is? What he transformed into? Then gaze upon his countenance and bow before the ruler of the eternal kingdom. Behold, the Pale King. And just to be clear, I'm not arguing the Pale King is the Radiance. I'm arguing the Pale King is the body we fight during our battle against the Radiance. A couple more clues in this regard are that the Radiance is crowned, despite never being described as a king of any sort, and also the background particles that scatter from its wings, which are identical to the ones produced by the monarch wings. They could have made the Radiance's particles shape more distinctively similar to Dream Essence, but they chose something specifically associated with the Pale King, presented in Soul White instead of Radiant Yellow as well. And lastly, in the moment we defeat the Radiance, whether it's the Void entity or the Lord of Shades, we don't ever target the Radiance's body. We pry open its head to reveal the light within, and that light is what we lash out against. That light is the real Radiance. The Hollow Knight was created as a vessel to contain the Pale King, while, at the same time, the King became a prison unto himself. This fate is the demise the Undying Worm had foretold. While the Hunter's Journal sometimes describes the infected bugs as being dead, their thoughts can still be read by the Dream Nail. To be infected is not the same as to be dead, but it's like being bound to a death-like state. The body still lives, but the mind is trapped, and, for all intents and purposes, the bug that you once were is no longer alive. The Pale King knew containing the Radiance himself was the only way to buy enough time for his plan to unfold, and he knew that he would eventually lose. His final shackle upon the Void was created with this in mind. The only way for us to acquire the Void Heart is by transforming the King's soul, and not only can soul be used to contain the Void, it can also manipulate one's mind by instilling higher thoughts. He needed us to be strong enough to defeat the Radiance, but not strong enough to awaken the Void entity, and the King's soul would make sure of it. Without their true lord, the Void and the Shades descend back into the abyss from whence they came, but, of course, his plan was not without flaws. Namely, the Godseeker, for, in Godhome, the Knight can bypass the will of the King and give focus to its true form. In its memory, the Godseeker says, "Gods of our future, seek thee, we shall." This implies they came from the past, from another long-gone civilization. The worm is known for its prescience, and even though it could peer far into the future, maybe the past was its only blind spot, the one thing he could not foresee. In-game, the Pale King is mostly described as a god. Outside of it, most descriptions I've seen of the Pale King were of a coward and a monster. Having reached the end of my journey, I see neither god nor monster, and certainly not a coward. Despite sacrificing the vessels, he opposed the Soul Master's research and the deaths it would bring to countless bugs. And he may have cursed his own progeny, but the sacrifice he asked of them was no greater than the sacrifice he was willing to make himself. His children are resting now, nestled back into the dreamless embrace of the void. And the world may never hear of the part he played in ending a war they'd never even know existed. But we who have seen his true semblance, we can still honor the worm-turned king, father and protector of Hallownest. Long may his memory live. All hail the Pale King.